Happy New Year, everyone. It is really great to be here with all of you tonight, and I have never had to give a speech like this one, so I was a little unsure how to start, and I started looking back at old city council meetings to see how previous council presidents have approached this speech. And in particular, I found myself watching the midterm addresses of former council president Bill White. And for those of you who don't know Bill White, he is a beloved former city councilor who just stepped down last year and had the distinction of serving on this body, as I understand it, since 1837. And what I noticed in Councilor White's midterm addresses is that he would always use a literary theme to tie these together. In 2013, he opened with a passage from Ecclesiastes where he talked about the importance of working together instead of working alone, and some of you might remember these amazing speeches he gave with a Star Wars theme. So I started thinking what would be a literary theme that felt right to me in 2023. And what kept coming to mind is A Tale of Two Cities. Not the whole plot, but that very famous first line, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And whenever I talk to people in Somerville about the work that we're doing on the city council, this line keeps coming back to me, the best of times, the worst of times. And in the book by Charles Dickens, that line has a very specific meaning. It refers to wealth inequality. It's the best of times for the rich, it's the worst of times for the poor, and that is absolutely relevant to Somerville and to the country as a whole. But tonight, that's not really how I'm thinking about the phrase. To me, the reason the phrase resonates is this. We have a city government that has never been more dedicated and overwhelmingly in support of tackling big problems that this community has. That's the best of times part. The worst of times part is that the problems we are facing and the reality out there for so many of our residents is more daunting than ever. So let's get specific. I want to start with housing and housing affordability. This, to me, is a perfect example of the combination best of times, worst of times. So I believe, and I really believe this, that this city has passed the strongest set of housing affordability laws of any city in Massachusetts. And I could easily spend the whole speech talking about that. We have a city council where we basically compete with one another to see who can come up with the best ideas for affordable housing for anti-displacement. And for people who follow Congress in DC, there's often this sense that we have these amazing policies and the hard part is getting the votes to pass them. What I often have to explain to people in Somerville is that is almost never the case. When it comes to affordable housing, the hard part is never getting the votes. The challenge is to come up with ideas that are within our legal authority and that really make a difference. And once we have good ideas on housing, the vote is almost always a foregone conclusion. And that political will is the best of part times. But let's talk about the worst of times. Despite everything that this city has done, try to rent an apartment in Somerville right now. If you are a family who owns their home, ask yourself whether your kids or your neighbor's kids could ever afford to buy a house in Somerville. We have a crisis here, a displacement crisis and an affordability crisis that is existential. And it is continuing to push out so many of the people who have made Somerville the amazing place that it is. The crisis, it's not new, it is certainly not unique to Somerville, but it is now intensifying to a degree that we have never seen before. The average rental price for a one-bedroom apartment in Somerville is over $2,700 a month. That is a 24% increase from last year, and another way to think about it is that it is $32,000 a year just on rent. And let's talk about what that looks like on a human level. This is a story, if you'll bear with me. A few months ago, myself and some colleagues were asked to sit in on an in-person negotiation between a group of tenants and their new landlord who had just bought the building and was raising the rent to a point where nearly all of the tenants were going to have to leave. And in this meeting, we sat around a big table, and the tenants introduced themselves. There was a woman who had lived in the building for decades and who, on 2 separate occasions, had been the person responsible for stopping small fires that she had found in the building. So 2 different times she had saved the building from burning down. There was a young guy who had immigrated here for grad school in science, and the first real community that he had built in this country was with these neighbors. And then a young woman spoke. She introduced herself as a preschool teacher, and she told us that she had lived in this same apartment for years, and it had been the place where her husband proposed to her, and several years later, it had been the place where her husband died suddenly of a heart attack. All of these people were on the verge of being pushed out of their homes for no reason except that a new landlord saw a profit opportunity. Every one of these folks was prepared to negotiate a rent increase that was fair, that they could actually afford, but that was not being offered. And you know how this landlord responded to these stories? He responded a few weeks later by asking everyone in the building to sign a non-disclosure agreement so that these neighbors could no longer organize with one another, could no longer compare rents with one another, could no longer share their stories with the public, with people like me. So you take stories like this and multiply them across the city. And I know that everyone around this horseshoe has heard countless stories like this or has lived through them themselves. People who have lived here for years and people who are just now starting to put down roots, being pushed out. And when we hear about a red-hot real estate market in Somerville, this is the reality we're talking about. And I will be honest, when I was writing this speech, I hesitated to include this story. The worry being it's so infuriating and sad that it can be demoralizing. But we can't look away from stories like this. We need to be clear about what we're up against, and getting demoralized is not an option. And that is what brings me back to the best of times, which is the political will that this community has to do everything we can to help people stay in their homes and to create new affordable housing across the city. What I am most inspired by on this council is the work that we do on housing. So let's talk about just the last year. I've been warned that giving a list of housing policy achievements can make people's eyes glaze over. But if you didn't want a list of housing policy achievements, you all should not have elected me president, because this is what I live for. So, in the last 12 months, we have expanded our Housing Notification Act. This is, as far as I know, the first law of its kind in the state to make sure that all tenants are aware of their rights and they know who to call when there's a problem. This means that tenants can get connected to our Office of Housing Stability and any of the other amazing community partners that we have to support people going through housing problems. We worked with the mayor's office to make a down payment of $8 million for a brand new affordable housing acquisition fund, which means that our nonprofit housing partners will be able to access that money to move quickly, to buy property, and to build permanently affordable housing. This means that more affordable housing is going to be built in Somerville. We voted to move forward to rebuild Clarendon Hill, which is the biggest affordable housing development in Somerville, and we saw the Community Land Trust acquire their first permanently affordable properties right in Union Square. We made it easier than ever to build accessory dwelling units, as we call them, backyard cottages, which will help people age in place, to make ends meet, and will create new homes for people to live in. After decades with an abandoned star market in the middle of Winter Hill, we are now seeing real movement towards a 50% affordable development on that site, setting a new standard for what is possible in Somerville. And just last month, at the last council meeting of the year, we closed a outrageous loophole in our own laws that was allowing developers to start the demolition process on a building without even informing the current tenants living there. This means going forward, tenants will be given a chance to get organized, to work with the city and with our nonprofit partners to make sure that they are treated fairly. And I want to emphasize, many of these efforts were led by first-term counselors. And so let me just take this opportunity to say that all 5 of our newly elected counselors are bringing incredible talent and hard work to this council, and I have already learned a ton from each of you, so thank you. So, as we look towards 2023, we need to keep housing affordability as our top priority, because that is the foundation of everything else that we do. I want to give just 3 of the opportunities that we know are coming up. One of the first things that we have on our horizon is a chance to increase linkage fees that we charge to large commercial developers in Somerville. This is money that goes directly to affordable housing and to jobs programs, and it is one of the best tools that we have to spread the financial benefits of new development in Somerville, all those new lab buildings, to the people who need it most. Many of you here may remember Van Hardy, a beloved community activist who passed away last year. Van was one of the people who helped get us linkage fees in the first place, and until the day he died, literally, he was pushing for us to increase these fees to match reality. So let's do Van Hardy proud. Second, we are going to have an opportunity to make good on our promise to create a rental registry in Somerville, which will help to protect tenants from predatory landlords, and it is something that many of our housing advocates have been working towards for years. And we are going to have an opportunity to expand our affordable housing overlay district and to continue improving our zoning code itself, to make sure that we are building the housing that we need in this city near our new transit stations. And while we push for more housing, we are simultaneously going to keep fighting for tenants against displacement. And we are going to double down on our efforts to lift the statewide ban on rent control and to pass the state-level tenant protections that we need to have sustainable neighborhoods. That is just some of the work that I know already is on the horizon, and I know that every counselor around this horseshoe and all of our housing advocates are going to continue bringing forward new ideas this year. Let's talk about another huge issue in Somerville, which is transportation. This one is the best of times part writes itself. The Green Line just opened. The Community Path Extension is opening in a few months. These are monumental achievements that this community just made happen. But the accomplishments of this last year go way deeper than that on transportation. The MBTA tried to pass a bus redesign plan last year that would have outright eliminated many of the important bus routes within our city. Lines that many of our seniors take to get groceries, to get to the pharmacy. But thanks to an unbelievable organizing effort in Somerville, we were able to reverse those cuts and to save the 87, the 89, the 90, which are so critical to make sure that people can get around within Somerville. And while it might not seem like it, we are making more progress than ever before on traffic calming and pedestrian and bike safety infrastructure across the city. Our city's mobility department has an interactive map that you can find on their website, and you can see the safety infrastructure that is being installed all around the city, and it is really something to be proud of. That's the best of times. For a taste of the worst of times, I invite all of you to try riding a bike down Highland Ave with a toddler on your bike seat, like I do every morning on the way to daycare. Or try to walk across Mystic Ave on foot, try to walk to Assembly Square. If you're a parent, ask yourself whether you would feel comfortable having your kid bike over to their friend's house in Somerville. Just take a moment to reflect on how many memorials and moments of silence we have had for people who were killed by vehicles in Somerville. We need to be real about the stakes. Street safety is, without question, one of the most serious public safety issues in our city, and we need to treat it like that. And we need to realize that we are trying to undo 100 years of unsafe street designs. So we need to be bold, and we need to think big about making our streets safe. And this year, one of the most effective things that we can do is to finalize our bike network plan and our neighborway plan and codify them into law. And we know that we can do this in a way that continues to draw people to small businesses, that improves accessibility for people with disabilities, and that respects all of the different needs for us, for everyone on our streets. This is the year for us to get this done and to get it right, to make our streets safe for everyone. Now, I could go through every issue in Somerville and talk about the best of times, worst of times, but I was Googling speech writing tips, and they say you should talk in groups of 3. So I've talked about housing and transportation. I'm going to end with another issue in Somerville, which is rats. This city has never been more invested in addressing the rat problem. We hired a rat czar to oversee these efforts. We have extended our baiting program. It used to just be for owners. It now applies to renters across the city. We now send citywide mailers to advertise the bait program. Our Department of Public Works is making progress every year to replace the old open trash cans that we have across the city with closed rat-proof cans. We have rat electrocution boxes. We have tested rodent birth control. We have had in-depth discussions about using natural predators like hawks and owls and feral cats, which, for the record, was one of the all-time great committee meeting conversations that I was ever a part of. And yet, no one needs me to tell you that it is the worst of times with rats. We cannot let up on our efforts. We need to continue to work hard and to be creative, as creative as we can, because this is incredibly serious quality of life stuff for people across the city. There are people whose kids can't play in their own backyards because of how bad the rats are. And we owe it to all of our constituents to continue treating this like the urgent problem that it is. It can be easy in Somerville to take for granted that we all support affordable housing and public transit and safe streets and immigrant rights and climate justice and workers' rights, and that we also care about neighborhood issues like rats and crosswalks and potholes. But what I really want to impress on all of us is that we can never take this political will for granted. There are municipalities across Massachusetts where pushing for more affordable housing is the opposite of a popular political platform. There are municipalities in Massachusetts that actively oppose new public transit and that vote down new community paths, which happened just months ago. So never take for granted what we have here. The political will that we have in Somerville is the best thing that we have going, and we need to use it. So once again, thank you all for everything that you do for Somerville, and Happy New Year's. I am looking forward to 2023.